Awesome. All right. Welcome, everyone. Where we're going to be picking up today is on page 111, and we are in the third full paragraph, be determined. That's where we're picking up. But we didn't make it all the way through the section that we're talking about today. Again, 111, third paragraph. Welcome to those that just joined us. So to contextualize where we are at this part of the book, in this part of the chapter 2 Wives, we described last week the 4 types of drinkers, which actually gave us a lot of helpful information that we could use to diagnose ourselves. And not that we diagnose our loved ones, but to get a gauge of their level of willingness. And so type 1, not even necessarily an alcoholic, probably a hard drinker. And type 1 has no sense that they have a problem and no desire to do anything about it. Type 2 has the symptoms of alcoholism, and they have a little bit more willingness. Type 3 and type 4, you can see the progression, and you can see as well the progression of the willingness, the openness to have a solution. And so where we're at is the directions on how do I help somebody that is type 1? How do I help a loved one? How do I help an alcoholic? How do I help a friend who doesn't think they have a problem and isn't open to a solution? And what we're in the middle of today on page 111 is what I call, because I counted them, and keep in mind I've counted them wrong, so don't worry about it, but the 6 principles of success. And last week, at the very top of page 111, we spoke about principle number 1. Principle number 1 is the first principle of success, is that you should never be angry. Now bear with me with this. Part of why we're looking at it through this lens is that anger doesn't work. Think about your own experience. Has anger ever gotten any of us sober? Has it even got us to pick up our socks? It just does not work. Now, this chapter does not exist in a vacuum. As we saw the interplay between earlier parts of the book and this chapter 2 Wives, this idea that this is not new information. I will be angry. I will have resentments. So what do? We utilize the program of action that we've been given so we are not showing up in anger. That's the context. The context isn't, go put up with crummy behavior and just smile and grin. But that idea of if I have a resentment, I need to be free of. Anger does not work, especially for somebody that's not open to a solution. Now, the second principle of success is at the first sentence of the second paragraph. Our next thought is that you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. So trying to control, trying to manage, trying to fix, trying to save, that does not work. And again, we can hold our experience. I know nobody here had anyone ever tell you what to do about your drinking. I'm just kidding. I know that happened all the time. Oh, the unsolicited advice. I mean, they're really persnickety. And after I peed on their carpet, you know what I mean? Want to tell me what to do about my drinking. A little unnecessary in my opinion. But again, it does not work. Being nagged, being told what I have to do, what I need to do about my drinking does not work. So principle 1, never be angry. Principle 2, don't tell them what they should do about their drinking. Again, that does not mean that we don't set boundaries. That's not saying that. A boundary is about my behavior. If you're going to get drunk, I'm just going to have to leave the house. As an example, that's a boundary. Telling them what they should do about their drinking doesn't mean we can't set boundaries. Doesn't mean we can't remove ourselves. Doesn't mean any of that. But saying you must, you should, you need to, it's not effective. it's not effective. So those are the first two principles of success, and we spoke about those last week, and we bounced around to page 90 and 91 and saw that, man, the people that love us the most, I got some earmuffs on that are the biggest. I cannot hear it from the people that are closest to me. And so now where we're picking up is 111, third full paragraph. It says, be determined. Now, this is going to be the third principle of success. It says, be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. And so, how do I summarize that? Don't isolate. Another way to say it is maintain healthy relationships outside of that relationship. Because when we're in a relationship with somebody who's an alcoholic, or we're the alcoholic in the unhealthy relationship, there's that desire to fix, to save, and there's often that enmeshment. And actually, you don't need to take my word for it. What we can do is we can bounce over to page 102. And so let's do it if you want. Let's pop over to page 102. And what we're going to look is, it's that really big paragraph, first full paragraph. It is right in the middle. Now we're going to go to near the bottom of the big paragraph, right in the middle of 102. It says, if you do this thoroughly, few people will ask you to drink. So that's sort of leading into the point that's important. While you were drinking, you were withdrawing from life little by little. Now you're starting to get back into the social life of this world. Don't start to withdraw again just because your friends drink liquor. Now the context of that is the recovered alcoholic working with others, carrying this message. But that singular idea that when we were drinking, we were withdrawing from life. Was that my experience as an alcoholic, that I was withdrawing? And guess what? My alcoholism does not live in a vacuum. I was withdrawing, and I was pulling the people who loved me into isolation as well. And so that third principle of success, back on 111, be determined your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. Maintain those healthy relationships outside of the relationship. Going back to page 111, it says they need your companionship and your help. And this is a beautiful little line that's going to point to something that we're going to see later on. But the thrust of what it is like to show up to life with a spirit of service. I'm needed by my friends. I'm needed by my family. I don't have children, but it's saying if you have children, your children need you. Don't ignore their needs. Don't ignore those opportunities to be of service, to try to fix somebody that doesn't want to be fixed, to change somebody that doesn't think they need to be changed. Go and live your life and maintain those relationships. And here's what I know out of experience, because I know I've been in toxic relationships, and I know I've worked with people who have been in toxic relationships. And I've worked with people as they left those unhealthy relationships. And saying, you gotta leave, doesn't get us there. They know, we know. And so if we build a relationship, a connection with God, if we maintain relationships outside of that, the world looks bigger, and we're able to take those leaps out in faith and not stay stuck. And so this advice is not, well, just grin and bear it. But it is one of those things that will be helpful to the codependent, as it will be to the alcoholic. It goes on to say, it is possible to have a full and useful life even though your husband continues to drink. And if you want, you can make a little note to see page 97. This is not an old idea, and this is the power of the actions of the 12 steps. So page 97, it's the very bottom paragraph. Page 97, bottom paragraph. Though an alcoholic does not respond. Again, popping back to working with others, carrying this message to others. So you try to work with them, they're not interested. Back in the day, we often met the alcoholic through their family, so we had the connections to the family. So it says, though an alcoholic does not respond, there is no reason why you should neglect his family. You should continue to be friendly to them. The family should be offered your way of life. Again, the way of life is these 12 steps as outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, regardless of whether they're alcoholic. That these principles are going to work. These actions are going to work with whatever trouble, pain, suffering which lies before us. And it says, should they accept and practice spiritual principles? Again, the principles for me are not nebulous concepts. For me, the principles of the 12 steps are in fact the tangible actions of the 12 steps. So should they actually do the work as a way of life, like their life depends on it, because their quality of life sure does. And I actually do, sorry, I'm off on a tangent. I do have a tremendous respect for anyone who comes to any 12-step fellowship. And I have some familiarity with Al-Anon. And I do believe the illness as it affects Al-Anon can be fatal as well. It looks like suicide. It looks like staying in a violent relationship and losing one's life in that way. It also looks like hypertension. It looks like heart disease. It looks like stress-related illnesses. So, I don't want to minimize the impact that this illness can have on those that do not drink, which does necessitate the same freedom that I need from that first drink. It's the same freedom that they need from the compulsion to try to save, manage, fix, control the alcoholic. So it says, should they accept and practice spiritual principles, there is a much better chance that the head of the family will recover. So this spoilers for suggestion number 6, but it says, and even though he continues to drink, the family will find life more bearable. Now that ending sentence ties right into what we were saying. Back on page 111, it is possible to have a full and useful life, though your husband continues to drink. And we were talking about, now I'm not going to bounce this around too much more, at least for a little while, in the chapter Working with Others. A lot of the thrust of what it was talking about is as we work with others, the newcomer is often saying, you don't understand, I need a job, I need to get my relationship back, I need this, I need that. And the thrust is nonsense. Their relationship is, their sobriety is not contingent on anything outside of themselves. Their sobriety is contingent upon their relationship with God. And so it then leads to follow that for anyone who has problems, my sense of well-being is not contingent on what is happening outside of myself, but it is contingent on my connection with God. And that is why it is possible to have a full and useful life, even if the alcoholic is drinking. Or even if our loved one is behaving in ways that we disagree with, we can still have a full and useful life because our sobriety, our emotional sobriety, is not contingent on what's happening out there. It's contingent upon what's happening in here, the connection I have with a power greater than myself. And my friend Rob, some of y'all know Rob, he'll put in the chat all the places where it talks about, he's not here, he's doing the Howard and Kathy study, but he will put in the chat all the places where it talks about that this way of life solves all our problems, not just the problem of my alcoholism. So this stuff works. So it goes on to say, we know women who are unafraid, even happy under these conditions. That you can be unafraid, that you can be happy regardless of what is happening. Now this for me is principle number 4. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. You may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try. And how I summarize this, or how I explain it, is we let go of the outcomes. So often I will show up to life, and this is just a human being. This isn't Paige who's an alcoholic. This isn't Paige who qualifies for Al-Anon. This is Paige who is a human being. I show up to life with the belief that happiness and joy or freedom only exists if this condition is met. And that condition might not be met because I'm not God. And I wasted so much time and energy sitting in the delusion of the God chair. You guys remember that metaphor? I'm sitting and I'm playing Nintendo with a controller that's not plugged in. I'm working hard trying to get the outcome that I want, the highest score of my life, but it's not plugged in. And God's got the controller. So I don't know what's going to happen. I have no control. I have no power over their alcoholism. But what I have control over is how I show up. So essentially, principle number 4, page 111, welcome, we're glad you're here. Page 111, principle number 4, don't set your heart on reforming your husband. Let go of the outcome. Leave the outcome in God's hands. That's principle number 4. And so, just to summarize, 1, never be angry. Never tell that person what they must do. Have healthy relationships outside of that relationship and let go of the outcome. That is where we're at. 4. 2 more principles of success. Ooh, cliffhanger. All right. It says, we know these suggestions are sometimes difficult to follow. Yeah, it's not easy to not act out in anger with somebody who is suffering, with somebody who is hurting. It says, but you will save many a heartbreak if you can succeed in observing them. What it's saying is like, yeah, I know this is a tall order. And it's going to be implied that you will need the power of God to be able to show up to life in this way. But it's going to save you pain in the long run. And it goes on to say, your husband may come to appreciate your reasonableness and patience. This may lay the groundwork for a friendly talk about his alcoholic problem. Try to have him bring up the subject himself, but be sure you are not critical during such a discussion. And that's that idea of we'll see that again. Let's let them bring it up. Let's not, because we're not going to tell them what you must do, right? And this is, we're going to put a little note to see page 90. It says, attempt instead to put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. So if we just have a look on page 90, it's if we have a look at the second full paragraph on page 90, it's the directions on how the alcoholic can approach the alcoholic prospect to carry this message, potential sponsee. It says if there is any indication he wants to stop, have a good talk with the person most interested in him, usually his wife. So in 2 wives, it's, the wife or the person is bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol. They know they're the most interested. That's why they're reading a book called Alcoholics Anonymous, because they're trying to change him. I get it. I've been there. So it says, get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his backgrounds, the seriousness of his condition and his religious leanings. You need this information to put yourself in his place, to see how you would like him to approach you if the tables were turned. And so this is the idea of seeking to understand rather than to be understood. Seeking to okay, I'm going to put myself in this person's place. That idea of how can I be helpful? That's what we're talking about when back on page 111, attempt instead to put yourself in his place. So that's what we're looking to do. And it goes on, bottom 111. Sorry, sometimes I bounce back and I didn't communicate it. We've bounced back. And listen, if we're here at this meeting, we're alcoholic. We have bounced back many a time. So I'm glad you guys bounced back. So it says, when a discussion does arise, you might suggest he read this book or at least the chapter on alcoholism. Now, I will make the joke. So sometimes you'll hear in the rooms Alcoholics Anonymous, the only thing you got to do is just turn to page 112 and read the first 3 lines. Follow that, you'll be okay. Read this book. Now, I actually know of some meetings that are called page 112 meetings. So I will say that if we want to follow the directions, page 112, first 3 lines, we cannot do that without the subsequent direction of going to page 32 and reading the first 3 lines. So page 112, read this book, and page 32, first 3 lines. I feel like I should have a more of a pregnant pause, but it's going to say more than once. Read this book more than once. And so that's the joke. I can't just get well by reading it. I've actually got to do the stuff in there, but I always think that's funny. So if you ever go and you hear somebody say, you just got to do 112, you might want to throw in a 32 as well. Read this book more than once. All right. So it says, back on page 112, trying to do good at my communication, tell him that you have been worried, though perhaps needlessly. You think he ought to know the subject better, as everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him you have every confidence in his power to stop or moderate, which I will say, if you're wondering what this part is called, I'm going to give it a bigger description, a more accurate description. I'm making a joke. This is called lying. I have every confidence in your ability to stop. No, you don't. You're not reading the book Alcoholics Anonymous if you do. And I'm pointing this out, 1, because I think it's funny. And 2, what we will see is as we progress into type 3 and type 4, where they are willing, where the consequences have piled up, the less, colorful we have to be with the approach. The less we need to add a little bit of theater to how we approach. We can just be like, hey, this book, it contains directions on how to recover. Boom. But when somebody does not think they have a problem, is not open to a solution, alcohol, that can cause some problems. It's just prudent to read a book about alcoholism, so you know the risks. I know that this doesn't apply to you, but I think it'll be helpful for you to just have a read. And then it says, say you don't want to be a wet blanket, that you only want him to take care of his health, which I always casually bring up. Listen, I don't want to be a wet blanket, nor a slightly damp one. I just care about your health, So that's you can use some more modern words if you want to zhuzh it up a bit. Thus you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. So what we read, what is the summary of what is the principle of success? And it is to give them the dignity of their own experience. So we're going to present the information. Here's a book. You might want to read it. We're going to see about how we could approach them. But the thrust of it is we are going to give them the dignity of their own experience. The dignity to not read the book, the dignity to not take advice, the dignity to make their own mistakes, the dignity to do what they feel is right. We're going to give them the dignity. And I that also is an idea that comes from Al-Anon, Bear with me with this. I remember I was doing some work in Al-Anon, and there was something that blew my mind. Because I heard for a long time, and my sponsor would say, Paige, you don't know what's best. And I'd be like, well, I mean, I'll say that's true, because I don't want to get into it with you. But in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I think I got a pretty good idea. Like, wouldn't it be best? Wouldn't it be best if this alcoholic who is suffering, who is dying, or my loved one who is suffering with whatever problem that they take this course of action, they have an awakening of the spirit, they awaken to their inherent goodness and value and a connection with the universe. And they go and they get to be a part of this world in a way that is miraculous. Isn't that best? No. That might be easiest. That might be simplest. But that might not be what's best. What they might need to do is try all the things that do not work. You know, I think about like my will versus God's will. And I still will have these moments of like, no, I got it, but I don't got it. Imagine that I am trying to figure out, a situation. And imagine, I'm looking in a darkened room and I'm looking through a little keyhole and I've got like a candle, maybe even a lighter. So I got to keep like relighting it like a Bic. I'm trying to look through that keyhole. And that's the vision that I have of the world. It's such a small and limited vision. But you see, God's in that room with the light on. You know what I mean? And so I don't know what's best. I know what might be easiest. I know what might be simplest. But I do not know what is best. It goes on to say he probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintance. You might suggest that you both take an interest in them. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. Your husband may be willing to talk to one of them. And I love that it's like this person doesn't even think they have a problem. It's like, go help somebody. Go help somebody. There's something about that. And in that helping, and for those of us who have worked with others, how often have you taken somebody through the steps and that cemented your own experience? Man, there's nothing like hearing my step one back from me from somebody I just met. You know what I'm saying? That. And again, we might think that that's an odd suggestion, but if we take Bill Wilson and we have a look at who he was through the lens of, man, this is a human being whose life was one of singleness of purpose. I'm not saying he didn't get involved in other things, but Bill Wilson's purpose in life was to help alcoholics. And so when he wrote this chapter, that is the lens through which he is writing it. Let's help people whose lives will be lost because they do not find the solution. And the families will be devastated. And the pain and suffering is immeasurable. So we see that in that suggestion as well. So it says, if this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject. But after a friendly talk, your husband will usually revive the topic himself. This may take patient waiting, but it will be worth it. Meanwhile, now here's the sixth direction. You might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. And so how do I help somebody? What is the help that they need? The sixth suggestion really is to carry this message. To work these steps ourselves and to carry this message of hope and recovery to those who are suffering. And it goes on to say, if you act upon these principles, so the 6 principles of success, your husband may stop or moderate. And so, again, to summarize, number 1, never be angry. Number 2, never tell him what he has to do. Maintain healthy relationships outside of the relationship. Let go of the outcome. Leave the outcome in God's hands. Give them the dignity of their own experience and work these 12 steps myself. Like my life depends on it, because it does, and give away every single thing that I find. Now, here's the thing. When we look at these 6 principles of success, maybe you don't have an alcoholic in your life that doesn't get well. You probably do, or somebody in your life that has a problem that doesn't want to get well. But when I look at this, I look at these principles deeper than just alcoholism. Like, man, this is powerful. And this applies to so many things. If you have somebody in your life who is struggling with mental illness and is experiencing an episode of psychosis, you're not going to be able to. Anger isn't going to help somebody who's in delusion. Anger isn't going to help somebody who doesn't know who or what they are. Telling them what they have to do, that doesn't mean setting limits about, like, if you need to be hospitalized. But you guys get what I'm saying. These are principles that work when I have a situation that I don't have control over. And it was a couple years ago. my uncle was, I do not like talking about this, and I've been feeling that I don't want to talk about it, and then that thing inside me that's like, nah, girl, you're going to talk about it. I'm like, I don't want to. No, you're going to talk about it. I don't want to. So just know that, like, that happens. So we're talking about it. A couple of years ago, my uncle, his cancer came back, and I spent 9 days with him in the hospital as he died. And my uncle, he was a good man, and he died an absolutely horrific death that he did not deserve. It was awful. It was awful. And part of what he went through was he did have some of his own mental health struggles. And of course, that was greatly exacerbated by the confusion and the paranoia that can happen in somebody's last days. And there were times where he would desperately need pain medication, but as soon as I would get the nurses to go get it to him, he would say no and turn it down. And there was a lot of confusion and a lot of that sort of thing. And I just remember as I was going through what I was going through and bearing witness to his suffering and his pain, that like I needed to follow these principles of success. And I'll tell you what that looked like. To show up with anger to a good man who is dying an awful death. A death he did not want to die, that he was fighting with everything that was in him, that was a losing battle, with suffering that was getting exacerbated by the more that he fought. And how could he not fight? How could I be mad at somebody who's doing the best they could in an unfair situation, who's confused and doesn't know what is going on, and who's scared, and anger was never going to help him in that situation. And the ability to show up with a love and a compassion that I promise you was not my own. Man, I was not getting a whole lot of rest, and I don't do well on rest. You know, he would, man, I really haven't talked about this in a while. There were times where nights where he'd call for help, and it was literally like every 20 minutes, all night I would get up and adjust his pillows, and I would, try to help him. I was not sleeping well, but I was able to show up with a love and a tolerance that is not my own. We should never be angry. The second is we should never tell him what he must do. That he was making decisions about his life and about his care. And of course he was confused, and of course he was afraid, but to impose that on him, to force him to take medication, would only make his fear worse, his powerless worse. To tell him to try to control it. There was nothing that I could do to change the outcome. And then when it talks about having healthy relationships outside of the relationship, I'm sitting there, and I'm sitting in the room with him, and it's all day, all night for 9 days. And there were times, he got moved to a different room, and I had to sleep on the floor. And the day before that happened, he had a fentanyl patch, because it's bone cancer, it's that type of pain, and he wouldn't accept it being changed, so he had no painkiller in his system with bone cancer. And all day he was crying out in pain. And then, he was able to accept the patch and have the patch on him. And we tried. I didn't tell him what he should do, but I tried to see, come on, let's see. And it took a while for it to kick in. So all day he was screaming in unbearable agony, and the fentanyl kicked in. But all night he was screaming in a different sort of spiritual agony. It was awful. And I was up all night on the floor, bearing witness to a good man dying a horrific death. And what did I need to do? Well, I reached out, and I did a 10th step, later on. And I was receiving 10th steps. They weren't quite as, I wasn't quite as on the ball as I normally am with some of those 10th step. I'm like, listen, you get a text, I'm not stepping out of the room. But that's what I mean. That idea that that I needed to maintain those healthy relationships. And after he passed, I let my friend know, and she's a friend that I did the 10th step with her. I do 10 steps with her today. Actually, she's going to be filling in the last two Wednesdays of September while I'm away. She's an incredible, wonderful member of Alcoholics Anonymous. She came and picked me up, and she sat with me for a bit while I processed. I cannot do this thing alone. And then when it talks about that idea of like giving them the dignity of their own experience, I couldn't control, I couldn't manage, I couldn't fix, I couldn't change the nature of the situation. What was asked of me was to show up with as much kindness as I could. And there were times, man, it was hard. And I'm trying to wipe the walls so that he can see that there's not spiders on them. And he thinks I'm poisoning his food. Like, that's what we were dealing with. And then when it says, talks about man, I've got to do this thing myself. The peace and the presence of God that I was able to experience in some of the most horrific things that I've bore witness to came as the result of consistent action that I took before and I was willing to continue to take while I was in this situation. And I am passionate about these 6 principles of success because my experiences, they work. They work. If I look at it through that lens of just be a housewife and put up with it, that's not my experience. My experience is, how do I face the powerlessness when life is happening? This can help me to show up. And to show up with love, and to show up with God's grace. And so that is why I am so passionate about these 6 principles of success, because they have worked for me in horrific situations. So going on, page 112, bottom 2 paragraphs, it says, suppose, however, your husband fits the description of number 2. So number two, he's not number 1. He's got alcoholism. He's got no control. He's got no choice. He's got the allergy of the body. He's got the obsession of the mind. But here's the thing. The consequences haven't fully hit. He's tried a little bit to stay sober on his own, but he hasn't been fully able to. And so it says, suppose, however, that your husband fits the description of number 2. The same principles which apply to husband number 1 should be practiced. So these 6 principles of success, we don't leave them there. We carry them. We carry them with us, right? So if there is somebody who is maybe open, maybe not, we still practice these. And it says, but, after his next drinking binge, ask him. And you'll notice the timing. We're going to wait until after the drinking binge. Not in the middle of it, because then the allergy's on. Not interested. Anyone interested in sobriety? Well, you're 2 weeks into a bender? Well, actually about 2 weeks. It's getting rough, and that might look appealing. But you got your 6 drinks in, the allergy's taking you, you're going. You're not looking up rehabs online. No, you're not calling your sponsor. No, the allergy's got you. So that is the timing. But after his next binge, ask him. And if you've been hanging around here a while, you might have some notes at this paragraph. And if you don't worry, we're about to get some notes in this paragraph. It says, ask him if he would really like to get over drinking for good. Do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else. Just would he like to? Do you want to get well? And so if you don't already have this note, you can make beside this paragraph to see page 42. So I'm going to go slow, and then we're going to go to these pages. So the first one, 42. Then we're going to go to page 58. Then we're going to go to page 90. Now we're already on page 112, and so we'll go to page 142. So I'm going to say it one more time. Man, I can't. Vivian has told me to talk slower, and I try. I'm trying. This is the best I got. I'm so sorry. So it is page 42, page 58, page 90, and page 142. All right, so let's pop over to page 42. So page 42. And where we're going to look is the paragraph. It is the first full paragraph. It's the one that has the two members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they grinned, which I didn't like so much. And then it says, and then asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. Do I think I have this illness? Am I done trying to do it on my own? So it's that same question. Do you want help? Are you open to a solution? Do you see that you have a problem? Are you willing to go to any lengths? And we'll tie that in. So let's bounce on over to page 58. So page 58, it's how it works. It should be a familiar reading. So on page 58, where we're going to go, 58, it's going to be the second full paragraph. So page 58, second paragraph, our stories disclose. So it says our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. Now this is the same question, but it's being asked to us. It's not being asked to Fred, Harry Brick. That's who they were asking. That's that guy. It's being asked to us. It is, if you have decided you want what we have. And I always emphasize, what do we have in Alcoholics Anonymous? What we have is permanent contented sobriety, contingent on the actions that I'm willing to take on a daily basis. Permanent contented sobriety, that's what we have. Do I want that? If no, that's cool. But if yes, we got a follow-up question. Part 2. If yes, are you willing to go to any lengths to get it? And that's being asked to us. Do I want what we have? Am I willing to go to any length to get it? Now I'm going to pop us over page 90. Page 90. And where we're going to go is I know we reference page 90 a whole lot. We're going to go the second full paragraph. Nope, third full paragraph where it says sometimes it's wise to wait until he goes on a binge. See that wait until after the binge? Not a new suggestion. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the bottom part of that paragraph where it talks about waiting for the end of a spree, or at least a lucid interval. Page 90, 1, 2, 3, third full paragraph, near the bottom of that paragraph. And it says, so wait for the end of a spree, or at least a lucid interval. Now this is the question. Then let his family or a friend ask him if he wants to quit for good and if he would go to any extreme to do so. Do you want to quit for good? Are you willing to go to any lengths? It's same question, different wording. All right. Now, last bounce around for this tangent that we're on is we'll pop over to page 142. So page 142. And it's going to be the first full paragraph on page 142. And the chapter is to employees. It says, next, he can be assured that you do not intend to lecture, moralize, or condemn. Hey, it's even telling the employers that doesn't work. Lecturing and nagging isn't going to work from the boss. And if it's not going to work from the boss, it's sure as heck not going to work from the spouse. And it says, if that was done formally, it was because of misunderstanding. If possible, express a lack of hard feeling toward him. At this point, it may be well to explain the illness. Now, here's the same question. Say that you believe he is a gravely ill person. Gravely means fatally. Say that you believe he is fatally ill. With this qualification, being perhaps fatally ill, does he want to get well? Do you want to get well? You ask because many alcoholics being warped and drugged do not want to quit. But does he? Will he take every necessary step, submit to anything to get well, to stop drinking forever? It even goes on to say if he says yes, does he really mean it? Or down inside, does he think he's fooling you? And then after rest and treatment, he will be able to get away with a few drinks now and then. We believe a man should be thoroughly probed on these points. Be satisfied he's not deceiving himself or you. So that's what we're doing. We're really diving into this idea. Back on page 112. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get over drinking? And here's the thing. If not, okay. I mean, honestly, when I'm working with people, I don't want to do the steps. Okay. I'm not going to make you. I don't have anything else to offer, to be honest with you, but I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to nag you. I'm not going to drag you through it. Well, I do say I'll drag sponsees through, but as soon as they start kicking and screaming, that's when I let go. They get dragged a little with me. But if they don't want to do it, I'm not here to convince them. That's not my job. Unfortunately, that is the job of alcoholism, is to beat me into a state of reasonableness, to cause enough pain in my life that I'm willing to take actions that I would not otherwise want to take. And in Tradition 9, in the 12 and 12, it talks about great love and great suffering are our only disciplinarians. We need no others. Great suffering is not my job. Great suffering is not my business. That is the responsibility of alcoholism. My job is great love. And that great love looks like offering my hand out to take their hand and put it in God's hands, to help them have this experience. Man, I talk about, if you want to get well, I will do anything I can to help you take this course of action. I really will. The people that know me, I will. If you really want to do this, I will help you. But if you don't, that's okay too. It just means I got a little more time on. That's not true. I don't got time on my schedule. It just means I got more time on my schedule. What a dream on the horizon that might be. Alrighty. I called my sponsor today, and we were talking about, like, that is has been his most consistent suggestion of, like, hey girl. He does, by the way, he never goes, hey girl. That's not how he speaks to me. That's how I speak. But that, like, take some rest. Take some time for rest. Could you rest? Yeah. All right. So it goes on, bottom of page 112. The chances are he would. Chances are he would like to quit drinking. Why? Because number 2 was showing some attempts to stay sober and failing. It says, show him your copy of this book. So give them this book, because this is the book that gives us the diagnosis for what alcoholism is, gives us the criteria of what is alcoholism and the directions for how to recover. It says, show him that as alcoholics, the writers of this book understand. And that's this idea that, like, when it comes to family, and we talk about that on page 18, man, we got our walls up, we got our hackles up. So it's almost like letting the book do the 12th step call. And that was the purpose of this book. Because I might be a sole alcoholic living alone in Calgary, Alberta in 1940. I can't remember exactly when the big book came to Calgary. I do know the story, but I can't remember the date. So let's say I'm in Calgary, Alberta, and I have a copy of this book. There's no other sober alcoholic, and I get mailed to me this book, that I could follow its directions and get well. That was the purpose. I mean, and they were kind of hoping, they're hoping it would sell really well, and then they could do some of their other ideas, but God knew better, and nope, that didn't happen. So it says, tell him some of the interesting stories you have read. And again, that's why we have the stories in the back of the book, to carry the message, just as we do in meetings, to hear from others who have had similar experiences. And it says, if you think he will be shy on a spiritual remedy, so if somebody is kind of resistant to the spiritual part of the program, which I'm always like, where's the not spiritual part of the program? I don't know where that is, because the program is the 12 steps, and the result is a spiritual awakening. So what's the not spiritual part? Anywho, but it says, if you think he'll be shy of a spiritual remedy, so not interested in spirituality, ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. Now, the chapter on alcoholism is more about alcoholism. Now, that might seem a little counterintuitive, because, we might be thinking like, hey, you could shine a spiritual remedy. Why don't you have a look at we agnostics? But here's why. For me to be open to a solution, I need to understand my hopelessness. And more about alcoholism is driving home the information. It does talk about the allergy, but it's driving home the information of the obsession of the mind. And the obsession of the mind is what makes this illness hopeless. You see, the allergy of the body means that I can never drink again, because once I start, I can't stop, I can't control it. But the obsession of the mind means that I will drink again. And only when I see that hopelessness, when I'm cornered, I've come to the end of myself, and I'm like going to be willing to grab a hold of the hope that is on offer. So it says, then perhaps he will be interested enough to continue. So it's, let's start with an understanding of the hopelessness, and then he'll grab a hold of the hope. All right, page 113. If he is enthusiastic, again, enthusiasm, it means to be filled with God's Spirit. That's the sort of original Greek meaning. So enthusiasm is a good thing. It's a positive thing. It's as if he's enthusiastic. Your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he is lukewarm or thinks he is not an alcoholic, we suggest you leave him alone. So it's not saying nag, try to convince, try to, fix, manage, save. Give them the dignity of their experience. And it's an interesting thing. It can be hard to catch fire in a place that's lukewarm. It can be hard to catch fire from someone that's lukewarm. And that's, at least for me, that's why I think that enthusiasm is so helpful. And by the way, the enthusiasm because one of the things, people give me feedback, most of it is lovely. Some of it, I didn't ask for that. I'm just kidding. But one of the most common things that I get told is, oh, your enthusiasm. Genuinely, I'm not putting on airs. I could not tone it down if I wanted to. It's hard enough for me to try to slow down the cadence of my voice, let alone tone it down. It's not something that I put on. It's a genuine thing. And it's hard not to get excited when you see people whose lives are changed, who are excited about what's happened. So it can be hard to catch fire and that joy, and man, let's go after it. Let's do this thing. When we just don't want to drink today, I'm going to have my white knuckles and pass it on. It's hard to catch that there. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's hard to catch fire when something's lukewarm. So it says, avoid urging him to follow our program. The seed has been planted in his mind, and that is the same direction that was given on page 90. I won't bounce us there, but you can make a note, page 90, because it's saying, don't urge him to follow our program. Don't force it. And here's the thing about the seed being planted in his mind. I've done a whole big book bounce around in the past when I do 20-minute shares on all the plant-based metaphors in the book, because I'm fun. Some of you are like, I don't know about that. But the thing about a seed is a seed in and of itself has everything it needs in order to grow. So you can take an ancient seed and you can plant it and it'll grow. What matters is where it lands, in fertile soil. And so we've already planted the seed. So the seed has everything that it needs, and we can't control the soil. And here's the thing about seeds. Again, not a horticulturalist, not a botanist, but I do know that when a seed starts to grow, where does it start? It starts with its roots. And so the seed's early growth happens underground. And you see, when you plant a seed, you might not think anything is happening because it's got to grow those roots before the stem pushes through the soil, which is a reminder that just because I do not see the immediate results, because I'm an immediate result sort of human, of my effort, of my work, that does not mean I am not helping. That does not mean something has not happened, something is not growing. The seed has been planted. And so it says, he knows thousands of men much like himself have recovered. That is the hope, recovered. You can underline or highlight that word. We emphasize that. Recovered does not mean cured. I would describe myself as a recovered alcoholic. I am not cured of alcoholism. There will never be a time when I can ever safely drink again. I always have the allergy. I will always have the allergy. But I am recovered. But just as much as there will never be a time when I could safely, where I could never safely drink again, there is just as true as there is never a time when I cannot be fully engaged in the daily process of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't have that luxury either. Because if I stop doing that, it'll take a little while. I mean, I will be miserable and it will take sooner than I think it will. But the obsession will come back and I will drink again. So when we talk about being recovered, what we're talking about is that place, the step 10 promises, where the obsession to drink is gone. As the work that I have done and continue to do on a daily basis, that is what that means, and that is the message of hope. And it says, but don't remind him of this. So he knows thousands of men, much like himself, have recovered. But don't remind him of this after he has been drinking, for he may be angry. It's one of those pick your moment sort of deal. Imagine you're hungover, you're feeling awful, and somebody's like, hey, there are thousands of people, and in fact, nowadays, millions in Alcoholics Anonymous who have recovered. And you're just trying to not vomit, that. Picking the moment is what it's saying. And it says, sooner or later, you will find him to read this book once more. And here's another important direction. Wait until repeated stumbling convinces him he must act. So when we give the dignity of their experience, if somebody's like, I just want to do yoga, or I just want to do this other recovery, or I just want to do this, okay, do it. One of two things will happen. It'll either work or it won't. And if it doesn't, it will begin to help them to see the truth about their predicament. So wait until repeated stumbling convinces he must act. Not my eloquent soliloquy of why you should take the steps. No, the suffering. And it says, for the more you hurry him, the longer his recovery may be delayed. And I was pushing it with time, so I will leave it there. And the next time that I'll be here, we'll be talking about number 3 and number 4. But the next 2 weeks, what we're going to have is Garrett coming in and doing 2 presentations on our home girl, Bobby B. I'll put the flyers in the chat, so make sure you stick around for that. So that is it from me. Over to you, Vivian. Thank you.